Y ahora es el turno de Rüdiger Wischenbart. Su ponencia se titula Análisis de las tendencias del sector editorial. Él es austriaco, se licenció en literatura alemana por la Universidad de Graz. Ha sido director de comunicación de la Feria del Libro de Frankfurt. Es fundador y presidente de Content and Consulting. Escritor, conferenciante especializado en informes de mercado para la industria internacional y buen amigo del Forum Edita. Rüdiger lo tenemos ya fichado eternamente. Rüdiger está preparando su chiringuito y él lo que va a hacer es abrirnos el foco. Ignacio nos ha ofrecido una visión más focalizada en lo que es el mercado español y Rüdiger nos va a mostrar una mirada más internacional. See, are you ready?
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. I must apologize because I do not speak Catalan or Spanish well enough to address you in your language. You must, I'm sorry to say, try to follow me in English. What I try to explain to you with some numbers and some analysis is what my late friend Mike Schatzkin from New York said a couple of years ago. The book publishing business in which I have spent my working life since the early 1960s is disappearing. So what I'm trying to explain is the deep transformation that we are all seeing in our business. First step, let's look, as my predecessor already started, let's look into numbers to understand a little bit the big picture in a historical dimension. 10 years of Forum Edita, I guess, is a good framework to look into 10 to 15 years of history. What you see is here, that's a really long shot from the 1950s for Germany until today, the output of new titles year after year after year. And you see that tremendous and continuous increase in title output by publishers until the crisis of 2007, 2008. That is really a tipping point for the entire, not only the entire economy, but for the book business as well. And many observations miss the big and lasting impact. It was everything going up until 2007-8, and now it's sliding and declining for a number of reasons that we want to explore. You see the same message when you look at the number of units sold. In 2015, after this tipping point of 28, it started to decline, and it is quite linear going down ever since. Personally, I prefer to look into units sold, books, actual copies sold, rather than money spent on books, because money is more complicated. The retail price of books is going up. Inflation is very, very significant in most countries. So you never know with the money metric what's really going on. Units, copies sold are more clear in that regard. And then, as I said, there is a big transformation going on. I point to something very, very interesting and complex, and that is when you look into translations, translated books. It used to be, for decades, a very clear hierarchy. 2/3 of all books translated had been written in English, and then came books written in French, in Italian, almost all Western European languages, nothing else. And all the other languages were tiny, tiny, tiny in the 1, 2, 3% of all translated titles. And for a decade now, and this is the yellow line, we see a very strange exception. Translations from Japanese. And that's the impact, of course, of manga, of graphic novels, and of all this. And that is not only about manga, it shows that there is something deeper going on. It's books that are not only made of language, but also of pictures. Books that are much closer to animated movies. So suddenly we see a cultural shift and a shift in the format of what books are looking like that's happening. Yeah? The red dotted line is fairly stable. That's the total number of translations. But the one that has a new dynamic in the marketplace is the surge of manga and of books from Japan, and now also more and more from Korea. We come back to this. Let's switch from Germany to France. Again, France was always a very big, stable market, and we see, with the exception, that's the wait a moment. The red dotted line is again the number of units sold. It's going down a little bit, but it's fairly stable. However, the average print run of books published in France is coming down since 2010 fairly significantly by about 25-28%. So you see, it's more and more difficult for traditional book publishers to make enough money from a title because the upfront costs are the same if a book is selling very well or not so well. So the print run, the average print run going down is a very, very complicated indicator of there is trouble in the air. And when we look at translations, again, we have that picture of suddenly the expansion of translations from Japanese due to manga. And here, France is particularly interesting as an example because it has such a rich tradition of bande dessinée, comics, graphic novels for a century. So when that is shaken up, when Asterix suddenly has a competitor that is serious in the form of Japanese monsters or whatever, you see there's something very deep happening. Spain, I just have a couple of snapshots because we saw the complex picture already before. But we see again that peak of the old market until the crisis of 2007, 2008. Then there was a dramatic rift when the market was going down. And now, with the economy in general going up steadily and in a very stable way in Spain when we compare it to France or Germany, and that is also really carrying up the market for books, but the title output has not risen as strongly as it used to be, and so you see that publishers became fairly reasonable by limiting their output in new titles to have a more robust economic model and foundation. And again, in translations, we have in Spain as well that coming up in manga titles translated from Japanese, but also, here I'm not the expert, but I just paid attention to the numbers. The titles in Catalan seem, in translation of other languages into Catalan, is going down. So I would be interested to learn how that position between Catalan as a language with regard to Spanish and to translations in general is faring, because somehow I have the impression, but I'm not quite sure, that there is some pressure on the Catalan system in translation. So I try to make you aware that books, there is something going on with books. I want to discuss now in more detail what this might be. The first thing is a very fundamental question. What is a book in the first place? There is a UNESCO definition which says it's a non-periodical printed publication of at least 49 pages, exclusive of cover, published in a country and made available to the public. Fairly reasonable, yeah? You can adjust this and use it for ebooks as well. Just the cover is not in cardboard but digital, but it's the same. But then, when ebooks came up 15 years ago, and when all the various new digital channels on the smartphone drew more and more the attention of our audiences, it became much more complicated to say what is a book. For instance, just two examples. That cube, you may know it when you, in your family, there are little kids. The Tony box. It's a little engine without a screen that tells stories to children, and they can even record stories. And there are all the classics in children literature are available for the Tony box, but also new titles exclusively published on the Tony are available. Is this a book? Is that little cube a book? Yes or no? I have no idea. But it's a very important question because the second picture shows the sales room of a Chinese company in their headquarters in Shanghai, which I could visit last year, Yue or China Literature. It's very similar to Wattpad, a platform for self-publishing, for reading communities, and they, by themselves, just China Literature, in these weird things where you cannot distinguish between a book title and the community of readers and authors that are gathering there. China Literature makes a revenue of $1 billion per year. So that's really as big as the big publishers in Europe. Are they making books? So suddenly you have totally new games in the room, and that impacts also on the reading. When kids are looking at their smartphones and consuming all these various forms and formats, are they reading books? Or if not, what are they doing? And how does this relate to books? Does it matter? I guess very much so, also in a market perspective. Why? Because also the role, the making and the being of authors has tremendously changed. If you look at authors who are really heavyweights, yeah, like Rebecca Yarros, what she started as a self-published author, and now the annual success of a big publishing company like Simon & Schuster, one of the big 5 American publishing houses, depends on the question if Rebecca Yarros and a couple of similar authors have a strong year or not. All the rest of what Simon & Schuster is doing in a year is relevant. But the real success comes from a few initially self-published authors. So it's getting very complicated. You have, for instance, one more example to that same direction. When you look at the top bestsellers in the US for the first half year of 2025, out of the top 10, you have 4 authors who come from that kind of new field. Suzanne Collins, Rebecca Yarros, Dogman, also a very funny series, and Thrillers by Freda McFadden, who also started as a self-published author. So in Amazon's Kindle top 100 bestsellers, 61% of titles are romance. Yeah, 2/3 is romance in that segment. Now you can say, okay, that's bullshit. That's not really valid literature. Yes, but the time for reading of kids or young readers is limited. And there's a big competition around what that time is spent on. And so all these forms really compete with each other. And then you have all these other formats like K-Lit, the newest kid on the block, literature from Korea, following the webtoons. Webtoons are one of these new formats. And I emphasized already other graphical novels. And when we go on, we can find so many more different new forms and formats. And that is the really big shift. When these are data for the US, because we don't have that same clear figure for most of the European countries. In the US, all the ISBN numbers are released, given to authors or publishers by Bauka. Yeah? And there was suddenly, around 2019, 2018, a big rocket start, the start of a big rocket. Bringing the number of released ISBNs per year to the skies, and that is self-publishing. And all these other forms of ways where authors can produce books and bring them through different non-traditional channels to their audiences. And out of these many released ISBNs, only 1/4, 1 out of 4 titles comes from traditional publishers. Yeah, that's what I mean with a big shift. And that is also commercially relevant. Unfortunately, we have almost no numbers about what's really going on in Amazon. But there is one figure that is a very strong and clear indicator. We know month by month by month the amount of royalties for small presses and self-published authors that these self-published authors and small presses are getting in terms of royalties from Amazon. And you see in a long curve between 2019 and 2023 how that is increasing. That shows the economy of these forms is robust and expanding. And that brings me to a very weird statistic that I produced early last year, together with, again, an American friend, Thad McGilroy. We tried to estimate how big are these non-traditional, some selected examples of these non-traditional publishing engines as compared to the traditional publishing corporations. The green ones are the traditional ones, and the reddish ones, brownish ones, Amazon, Yuan is the China literature that I emphasized, Wattpad, Webtoon, Tonies, Storytel, the audiobook company, which is promoting subscription, how big they are. And as you can see, they match the biggest traditional companies by now. And for very long, the publishing industry was very proud of being the biggest cultural industry all over the place. Well, if you give it a bit more realistic look, which takes into account, as I mentioned, the time of audiences spent on one or the other channel, format, platform, then we see book publishing in green again is big, but clearly not the biggest. SVOD, so that's the video streaming, is bigger. And if you take all the film and TV production, is much bigger. And that is relevant because more and more content appears in many formats, and the business model for much of this is totally different from the business model of the book publishing industry. Most of the new approaches are subscription-based and not selling you one copy of the book. And that escapes all our statistics. We have no clue how much is the subscription part in the book business, but it's increasing, it's growing. And that's a big rift if you are in a subscription industry or in a retailer-driven industry. Yeah? So that is what I mean with the big transformation. So what is that book business really today? Yeah? You have the core measured in units, in sales, through bookstores, through Amazon. But then you have so many others, and they other circles, and they overlap. We don't have that one clear-cut image of a book business. We have a very complicated, integrated, model-rich, diverse environment where all kinds of other things coexist and compete with each other, both in the economics and in the attention, gaining attention of the audiences. So, to make it brutally short, it is complicated and it's a mess. When I try to come almost to an end, when I try to bring this into a scheme that is simple enough to understand it, then I must say, whatever you take as a book in the book business and the book industry very much depends on your perspective. Who are you when you are looking at that? Are you an author? Are you interested to selling a product? Are you about interested in reading, in the cultural, political, civic act politics approaches? Or are you in the public sphere where you, for instance, try to stabilize copyright against new entrants and competitors, like with artificial intelligence, when you are trying to defend reduced VAT or fixed price regulation for books? Yeah? All this has very different angles, very different purposes, and different agendas, and would require different data. And unfortunately, for many of these different approaches, we have only very poor data. So just to bring it to a good conclusion that has both the risks and the, how should I say, the good advice for how to navigate these rough waters, what should we be aware of? Number one, by now it's the authors who drive the business of books, and not anymore the publishers. The publishers are more and more service providers for the authors and the audiences. Number two, therefore, the publishers very strongly need to sharpen their profile and be aware of the dynamic landscape that I just tried to describe. Publishers must learn how to exploit the many channels and platforms without getting lost in that confusion, in that mess. Anticipate also, very, very important, the transformative impact of artificial intelligence, because everyone will use AI for many, many different things very soon. That is not a question, that's a fact. AI, however, is diluting, but not replacing the book. You will have many books created that would not have been created without AI, but it's not destroying the book. It's just a more competitive environment where we have to find our place. And a much higher title output will therefore compete for the audience's attention. So there, if you wrap it all together, there are many pitfalls, but also a lot of possibilities. Using these options requires a very high level of professionalism. This is why schools like this one are so important. To be successful here requires a lot of courage. Don't be afraid of this, but be aware of the complexities. And of course, you need, as always, a good hand and a good luck to really pick the best authors and make the best books for the good audiences. Thank you very much. When you are interested in a little bit more details, here you find more. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. To shorten your conference, thank you for your commitment with the Forum Edita. We have just 2 minutes for a couple of questions. I have one question for Ignacio. Ignacio López nos dice, en la estacionalidad no se representa la última semana de mayo y las primeras de junio, que coincide con la Feria del Libro de Madrid. Creo que es bastante representativo de las ventas y supone un gran ingreso para muchas pequeñas y medianas editoriales. ¿Acaso no es relevante esta feria en la estacionalidad? Gracias.
Sí, es muy relevante, pero hemos decidido este año, como la Feria de Madrid es muy importante, eso es indudable, y de hecho yo creo que en otras ocasiones que hemos enseñado el gráfico sí que lo habíamos puesto. Como hay ferias en todos los sitios, en todas las ciudades, afortunadamente, pues hemos decidido no. Vamos a ver, la estacionalidad que hemos puesto nosotros es comercial puramente, y es verdad que la Feria de Madrid es muy importante, y además dura 3 semanas, más o menos, pero también es verdad que hay otras ferias durante el año, hay otros lanzamientos, etcétera. Entonces, quiero decir que entonces tendríamos un gráfico ya lleno de promociones por todas partes, pero indudablemente es muy importante la Feria de Madrid, sí, sí, por supuesto.
And the last one for Rüdiger Wischenbart. This person says that you say that only around 1 of every 4 titles comes from a traditional publisher. So does it make any sense the situation in Spain where independent publishing houses are emerging every week? Are they crazy?
No. This is very much due to self-publishing. What we see, we used to live in a world that was simple. An author needs a publisher to publish their books, give it to the bookseller, and it was the job of the booksellers to sell it, to find the audience. Yeah? Until 10 years ago, that was basically the model. That is gone. And now that model represents, not in turnover, but in ISBNs given, 1 out of 4 books. 3 out of 4 books are self-published, are published by non-traditional publishers. But for instance, when I release a report, a research report, it gets an ISBN. I'm a publisher. No, I'm not a publisher. I'm a researcher. But I can release these things. Some of them are for sale, some of them I give away for free, yeah? And that happens across the board. And that is what makes the 3 out of 4 titles. And that changes a lot, because those in the quota of the publishers need to be much more precise in what they release, and how they themselves, not only through the booksellers, but themselves, direct-to-consumer marketing, how they find their audiences. And then you have indeed really all over the place new publishing houses, small publishing houses that are popping up. But they must also behave very differently from the old ones. They must be very serious about being very efficient service providers to a very clear group of authors.
New publishers for new times. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to see you again in this Forum Edita. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.